So today we're going to explore how we deal with the enemies in our lives. Understanding that when we say that word enemy, we're talking about any situation or any person that looks or feels against us. We started last week with the premise that no one or nothing is against us. We sang this morning, if God is for us, then there is nothing that can be against us. And if we really believe that, if we are willing to have that as a foundational understanding of life, then our focus needs to shift to then understand why it is in this human experience that we're having that it can certainly seem that way. It can certainly feel that way. And then, as a result of that understanding and exploring it, be willing to discover new ways to navigate through the times in our lives when it feels like, when it appears that life is not moving in the direction, is not being for our highest good. Another foundational understanding that we are called to embrace in order to really be able to step into this new way of thinking and navigating things is to realize, and this is a tough one, that conflict is for us. It is there for us. And we can understand it in the way that it is a mirror to each of us of where we are disconnected from our spiritual wholeness, where we are disconnected from being able to show up as our authentic selves. Reverend Dr. Gary Simmons, who has written the book, The Eye of the Storm, which I'm using as part of the focus on this series that we're having, he writes this. He says, conflict brings us to the edge of our resourcefulness. And that is why the idea of embracing conflict is so unnatural and even frightening. It brings us to the edge of the way we know how to be and engage in the world and stretches us to discover even more. And when we can remember that conflict comes to us, that conflict does not come to us, rather it comes from us. Because the same event can happen at different parts of our lives, and that event can feel very disconcerting depending upon where we're at in one moment, and then we might experience it a few years later, and in our growth and wisdom now, that same event can show up and we can be in that center of peace. We can see that whatever's unfolding is really there as a soul's growth opportunity. Now, I know that sometimes I go, come on, really? Have I not grown enough? Can I just have, And yet, as I've been willing to embrace this, it's helped to shift me to say, I want to get what's here for me right now because I don't want to do this again. If I can really get what it is that I'm to learn and grow through, then perhaps I don't have to keep repeating these same kinds of difficult experiences. Conflict arises when we have inner competing intentions and they clash. It's a good place to understand. For our human ego, for that human part of us, it is single-focused on keeping us safe and being happy. And by happy for the ego, that means everything feels good. That, we're not having those sensations of fear or worry or disconnect. We're happy when that's happening. And to be valued. The soul's purpose that also lives within us is always seeking greater opportunities to move into areas of our life where we haven't realized our full potential yet. So you can see that oftentimes that's why there is this conflict even within us when conflict shows up in our lives. When I was younger, and I think I've probably shared this with some of you at different times, I was brought up and believed in that time that the purpose of life was to be successful, whatever that meant, and for me it meant, having a good career, it meant having a wonderful family, it meant having enough financial resources to do what it is that I wanted to do, that I was admired, that there was fun in life. That was the goal. And I worked hard at that goal. I poured my heart and soul into creating that. In fact, it was difficult to even enjoy any of it because I was so busy creating it that by the end of my 20s, I was making more money than anybody in my family had ever made. I, had all the nice things that anybody could, want. I was successful in what I was doing, and yet realized I don't really feel purposeful, satisfied. I don't know what I'm doing here. This isn't it. When you get to it and you go, well, no, this wasn't really what I thought it was going to be when I achieved all of that. And subsequently, a few years later, I had a soul's awakening, and it took me a long time to figure out how that was going to manifest in my life, but I knew there was a greater purpose. I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was a greater purpose for me being here. I think this is probably true for each of us, that when we can discover what our soul's purpose is, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what we do for a living. It doesn't have anything to do with how much money we have or don't have. None of that really is a benefit or a detriment when we know and when we're living from the place that we came here to live into. And even though my life now, in fact, sometimes looks more difficult and chaotic and not, the outer picture is not this picture of bliss for others. There is a sense of bliss that lives within me because I know I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Doesn't make it any easier, but yet there is, I don't even know how to describe it. There's a satisfaction that cannot be gained any other way. I think this is true for each of us. Whatever that is, we know it. When we just feel we are on purpose and in alignment with exactly the way we have designed and been called to come into this life. And this is why we are called to ultimately begin to realize and make friends with conflict. The enemies that show up in our lives could be our bodies, could be an illness, could be a colleague who throws us under the bus, could be a loved one making poor choices in their life, at least from our perspective. It could be a divorce, it could be death, it could be a myriad of things that disrupt the peace that we were experiencing. And I'm just curious, for you, well, let me share this one quote first, because this is important too. So here's how you know that the enemy has arrived. You know that you are in relationship to an enemy when your first inclination is to try and control the situation, or to be right, or, and I will probably put and, this is a quote from him, but I would probably say, and you want to make the other person wrong. You've engaged. You are swirling out there in the storm with them. So we know we can recognize when we're with the enemy, but I'm curious for you, and I want those, I see there's a number of people out there online with us, so you can type it in the comments, and I'm going to ask you, just one word, how do you deal with the enemies that show up in your life? One word. A sentence. How do you do it? Sometimes it's to run away. Sometimes it's to gather our, one of the things that I used to witness myself doing all the time is, well, I know I'm right, so let me gather my forces that will also agree with me and tell me I'm right, so we can create a little army to make sure the enemy knows why they're wrong. What else? What else do you do? Pray and meditate. That's a great way to begin. Say again? Talk it through. That's another way. Let me see what we got here. Pause, breathe, try and understand is what Rick's saying out there in virtual land. Anybody else? Well, say again? Agree to disagree. Look at it as the observer. That's a good strategy. It'll get you closer than gathering your army, because gathering the army, in my experience, has never caused the conflict to dissipate. If nothing else, the other side's ratcheting up with their army, and we're preparing to go to battle. Well, Jesus gave us some very specific instructions on how to deal with the enemy, and that's what I want to share with you this morning. In the book of Matthew, in the 5th chapter, verse 44, and this also shows up in Luke in a slightly different way, he instructs us, and this is what he says: love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you. This is one of those where I think as Christians we often go, yeah, that was nice, yeah, that was good instruction. But I really want to break this down to see how we can take this very specific teaching and begin to try and apply it to our lives. Jesus, when he talks about the enemy and how we can take that energy of transforming an energy into a friend, first instructs us to love. And to love means to accept. Sometimes that's the first step we have to take, is to accept this is where I am, this is where life is right now, this is the state of this relationship or the state of my body right now. To embrace and to value. So when we talk about loving our enemy, those are some of the beginning steps that we can take. He instructs us to bless, and to bless something means to endow that situation or that person with the capacity to be a force for good in your life. To begin to say, this is here for me. Let me see what I can learn and discover and grow as a result of it, for then I am blessed. He also instructs us to do good, which means to do the right thing. To be the person who says, I am going to not allow my humanness to direct how this is going to go. I'm going to come from that place of love and allow love to guide me to what that right thing is. And ultimately, as someone suggested, to pray. And to pray means to give our thoughts to God and be willing to hear what God is helping us to understand in this process. We can love the enemy when we accept it's here for us. When we can begin to understand that it's mirroring to us, it is a mirror in our face of those places where we are not, in that moment at least, but perhaps it's more than that moment, connected to our wholeness. If we knew in that moment that nothing can be against us, then we don't have to engage and we can love the other person because we know it's not about us. It's about their own struggle to connect with their wholeness. And we can see that this is another avenue which I can fulfill my soul's purpose. As we bless something, we can realize that that situation, what is in front of us right now, can be a source for good for us. To act as a blessing is an expression of faith. It is to say, beyond this, I know. And we know this, as people who have been on this planet for a while. You know, in hindsight, you can oftentimes look at something that was horrible when you were going through it, to say, and yet this got me to this place. If it weren't for that unfolding in my life, I don't know if I could be in the space I'm in right now. One of the things that I really like to do when I'm in this process of really trying to shift my internal state of being and be able to begin to acknowledge that this could be a blessing for me is something that came out of the Keys to the Kingdom course. And I don't know if any of you have ever taken it, but it's a great affirmation that helps me move into a space where I can begin to know that this is here for me. And it goes like this. It says, this too is good. This too is God. This too is for me. And I demand to see the blessing in it. And it actually works better if you go, and I demand, get your whole thing into it. So I'm going to ask you, if you can think of something right in this moment, bring it to your mind's eye, and be willing to say with me, if you want to stand up to do this to get the full energy, you can sit if you want. But we're going to do this together. We're going to do it twice together. So you got something that you're thinking of? All right, and I want you to say to whoever that person is, whatever that situation is, ready? Here we go. This too is good. This too is God. This too is for me, and I demand to see the blessing in it. Let's do it one more time. This too is good. This too is God. This too is for me, and I demand to see the blessing in it. It works. It truly does if you can remember to do it as close to the moments as you can. And then out of that, you can begin to see how that could possibly be a truth. Then Jesus tells us the third step in dealing with the enemy is to do good, even to those who hate you. The last thing that most of us want to do when someone treats us badly is to do good. That's not the typical go-to response from our human nature. His or her treatment is all the proof that we need that they don't warrant good, something good from us. But as Reverend Gary reminds us, you first must be willing to see that this person's hatred is not about you. We want to make everything about us, but most of the time, what other people are doing and saying is not about you, even if it's directed to you. It's about what's missing in that relationship or in their life at that moment. It's about sometimes what you said or did, or you didn't say or you didn't do, but it's about what's missing for them, what they're needing in that. It's not about you. It's about their attempt to find love and to find peace, even if it's a misguided attempt. And that's been true for all of us too. When we're doing something that seems that it is causing chaos and conflict in our lives, it is not about them. It is about us and our desire and our attempt to fill the needs that we have. Doing the right thing means letting go of needing to be right and refocus our attention of how can I be an avenue through which God's love, God's peace flows into that relationship. Sometimes, and my daughter will attest to this, just saying, oh yeah, you're right. Especially when it's the small stuff. You know, we tend to just argue even when it doesn't really matter. Is this, and that's another question, is this really going to matter 5 years from now? Well, if it's not, let me let it go. You're right. I apologize. I regret that, I wasn't able to do or say or be the support that you needed in that moment. And as soon as you say that, to say, I was wrong, the energy, the winds are very difficult to keep stirred up. And it begins, and it's going to be unique and different for each of us. What's the right thing to do in this situation? What's the right thing for me? We can always come up with pretty easy answers about what's the right thing for the other person to do in this situation, but to ask ourselves, what's the right thing for me to do in this situation? Because we have to begin to see it from this big, broader perspective. Jesus also reminded us in Matthew that what a man profited, and profited might mean you were right, you got your way, you won the battle, if he shall gain the whole world and yet you lose his own soul. What have you gotten? What have you really, truly won? You don't lose anything by doing the right thing. It may not give you the same level of ego satisfaction. However, the reward that you get will last for an eternity. And finally, Jesus tells us to pray. And praying for our enemies is a way to shift our attention back to our center. When we can begin to reconnect with who we are, who our spiritual identity is, and then be able to see this relationship and pray for this situation to be an avenue for healing and growth. And that's ultimately what we pray for, is that we want healing and we want to grow through this. When Jesus was on the cross, he prayed for his enemies. Father, forgive them. And then he added, for they know not what they do. His prayer was a way that he could free his own journey from judgment. He could free himself from condemnation of others, or experience himself as a victim in all of this. And his resurrection was possible because he released all thought, all human thought of fear or limitation or bondage. In that prayer, he was able to release it all. And that's the opportunity that prayer offers for each of us. When you pray for your enemies, you lift yourself and the situation into the peace and the serenity, the very essence of God that's always present in every storm, in every conflict. Gary shared in his book, and he's a martial artist, so if you're reading the book, you'll get a lot of examples of how this also shows up in the martial arts that he's practiced for all of his life. But there is a Chinese saying that he shares, embrace tiger, return to mountain. This was a very fundamental teaching in ancient Chinese theology. And it means that we can only return to the mountain, which represents peace and harmony, by embracing the tigers that cross our paths. And when it comes down to putting this into practice, our human nature wants to do just the opposite. We want to run, or we want to get out our spear or our gun and kill the tiger, or we just simply freeze and are unsure what to do. But we know that if we can be willing to stand and embrace and bless and pray for and love, then we have the opportunity to experience life through the eyes, through the heart, and through the love that is the God presence everywhere. And so that is our opportunity. And paradoxically, it's the only way that we'll really get to that place of peace. Sometimes our humanness needs to know what's in it for them, too. Well, we'll get to be in a better space of peace. So I invite you right now to join with me as we move into a short time of meditation. Just wherever you are, breathe into this moment. Get comfortable as you can wherever you're sitting. Perhaps close your eyes or just focus on some point in the room so that your attention now is turned inward. And your attention is now aware of the breath that's always there breathing us, when most of the time we aren't even aware of it. It is the same way that God is always present, walking this journey with us, even in those times where we're not consciously aware of it. And as you breathe into this moment, feel a sense of relaxation falling over your entire being. Body, mind, and spirit. And in this inner sanctuary that we can always tap into when we're willing to take the few moments to bring our attention back to the center of our hearts, which is where God lives within us, which is where divine wisdom flows through us, which is where the peace that cannot be moved by the outer winds is steady within us. In this space, see if you can't bring into the mind of the heart someone or something that is disturbing your peace, that feels like there is conflict stirring around it. Now see if you can't love that in this moment. To send that enemy divine love that loves for the sake of loving. See if you can't catch a glimpse of how this might be good for you, that it might actually bless your life and your life's journey. Ask yourself, from this highest place of wisdom, what is the right thing that I can do to bring greater love and peace and joy into this relationship? And to pray, to be willing to just give this to the God of your being, to ask that that divine energy that is God's love be the guide, be the source, be the center of this relationship. And as you become aware of your breath once again, aware of your body, aware of the thoughts floating through your mind, take this moment of peace and allow it to flow through you this day and in the days to come. And when you find yourself being pulled and tossed about in the midst of conflict, know that you can return. You can return to the mountain of peace and let it be what supports, what loves, what grows you through even this, so that you can see its intimate and wonderful goodness, so that it can be the vehicle from which you have come to be the way of God. and feel that sense of deep and abiding joy and peace of being on purpose, on your soul's purpose in this journey. And whenever you are ready, you can open your eyes and celebrate this possibility for every conflict that arises. You know, this journey to be love in the middle of conflict, it's not easy. It's not something that we will naturally, at least from our human perspective, say, yay, let's do it. But it is what you have come to this planet at this time, in this moment, to do. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Well, it is our opportunity now to share of our financial good with Center of Unity. It is through your loving gifts that allow us to do all that we are called to do. It allows us to continue to live out the mission, to inspire this spiritual growth and to bring greater love into our world. And so I hope you give whatever it is that you choose to give today with that energy of love, that we always invite that flow of love, of giving and receiving that energy of love in all that we do. And we certainly don't want to leave out anybody who's watching us via Facebook or YouTube. We would invite you to go to our centerofunity.org webpage. If you go to the Give button, there's an opportunity for you to share there. And then if you scroll down, you will see a bunch of pictures of different affirmation possibilities. Just pick the one that's speaking to you, and you will receive your affirmation for this week. So join with me as we hold these in our hands and in our hearts and bless these gifts together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I give, all that I receive, and all that I am.
Okay, so let's all stand together and end our service with the peace song, please.
And it begins with me every time I remember to love, to bless, to do good, and to pray for all of what's happening in my world. And we know as we go, the prayer for protection is always walking this journey with us. Let's speak it together. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Have a beautiful week, everyone.